The law of expansion is really broad, no pun intended.
How broad this subject is. John actually wrote a book just about this subject.
I believe it.
Yeah, that book, No Limits,
Yeah.
is about capacity and the law of expansion.
So yeah, so No Limits by John C. Maxwell is another book you should pick up from this chapter. Uh, we're going to do another series here soon too. I'll tell you all about it when we get done with week 15. But let me start with some stuff in the book. These are just written down quotes from the chapter. If it ain't broke, break it. The potential that exists within us is limitless and largely untapped. The only way to increase your capacity internally, that's personal growth, right, is to change the way you approach your personal growth. These are loaded. We could stop right there, but we won't. We won't. We're going to continue to tease, be a brain teaser today. So how do you increase your thinking capacity, Danny? I'll let you write that question down and come back to it, okay? And I put a couple things underneath that here for our audience. It starts with how we think and what we do. Stop thinking more about work and start thinking what works. I like that. Start thinking, can I? Start thinking, how can I? I like that too. And so here's a common response. The most common reason people don't overcome the odds is they don't change or they don't challenge that enough. And I say that because, and I'm going to put a hurtism here, I have seen a lot of people in their business and personal growth quit right when they were at the cusp of getting over the hump, right? Because they didn't go that extra step and willing to go through the challenge to get to the next sphere. So put
That's
a little
that's called 3 feet from gold.
Yeah, right. 3 feet from gold. And put a little asterisk by that because seriously, that'll probably be something we'll discuss here with Danny in a minute. The more that we do something, the more we will become successful at it. And the reverse of that would be is the more we don't do the things we should do, the more we'll get stuck. That's the hurtism there, okay? Move with intentionality creates possibilities. That was the very first law we discussed in this book. That keeps coming up, Danny, the law of intentionality. That's a big law. It's another one a lot of people should focus on. Failures and setbacks can be great tools for learning. Doesn't necessarily mean you'll feel real good about it. And I always tell people, failure doesn't feel good, but it can lead to good things.
Say that again.
I said, failure leaves us feeling, doesn't feel good, but it leads to good things. That's a hurtism.
I like that.
Well, thank you. Write that down. We'll write a book about it, okay? Knowing the future is difficult. Controlling the future is impossible. But guess what? Know your present. Know what moment you're in. Now, he says know the today in the book, but I'm saying break it down to even more microseconds and minutes, and that is to know your present.
My mother-in-law used to say, be where you're at.
Be where you're at. That's good. We could talk about that for ages. How many people know where they're at? Wow. Ooh, another book. That's 2 books, Danny, we could write, okay, together. All right. Stretch new ideas. Stop doing only those things you have done. And then the verses is start doing things you know need to be done. Now, I'm sure you're going to ad lib on this a little bit, but what that basically, from my perspective, when I wrote that down, that caught my attention, is that there's always these things we need to do, but for some reason we stick to things that we do all the time and we never get to them. Right? We call it procrastination, I believe, somewhat, or maybe the fear of failure, fear of success. We get it, all that. Here's an attraction principle I'm going to finish up with and let you jump into some of these thoughts. Do more than expected. As part of your law of expansion in your personal growth, the one thing that grows you faster than anything you could ever do is to do more than is expected. That seems to be a common attraction principle throughout just about any coaching program you go through, Danny. Any book. One of the attraction principles is to do more than we expected. So let me put up this right here for you, sir. I want to put your website up. All right. So I gave you some things to ponder on. Is there anything in particular you'd like to pick on?
Let me say something about 3 feet from gold. You
Oh,
mentioned it.
okay.
It's actually a book by that name. Napoleon Hill didn't write it, but some people at the Napoleon Hill Foundation wrote it. Napoleon Hill wrote Think and Grow Rich. And in there, he talked about a guy that gave up. He made a little. He put together some money, borrowed some money, raised money from friends and family back in Pennsylvania. Went west to because he had bought a gold claim, and he panned gold, worked that thing, dug through the mountain for 2 or 3 years, and finally gave up. Sold it to somebody else. Went back home with his tail between his legs. But the guy he sold it to hired an engineer. That engineer came and said, in this tunnel, you just need to keep digging. 3 feet later, they found it. Napoleon Hill tells a little bit of that story in his book, Think and Grow Rich. But then the foundation has written a full book around that, and it's a true story. And the guy somewhere in Pennsylvania, and but that was that's and it's tough to know when to stop. That you're just beating a dead horse.
So while you're thinking into that thought, let me ad lib on that a little bit. So what I'm hearing you say, of course, is that challenge part, right? Where we just don't go far enough because we give up, we think we're defeated, whatever that causes that, right? But also, if we could start thinking into that expansion is always an action, it's always a verb, right? It never really ends. It's expanding out. Personal growth is an ongoing thing. Expansion is an ongoing thing. So we look at it as an action, correct? So the buzz the I always think like a reverse engineer thing. So if the action stops with us and we know it, then we know something's broke. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I didn't mean to stump you there. I just went down a dirt road on you.
Okay. That's pretty deep. I'm going to have to come back to that one.
Oh,
but when you want to stop, I like what John he says, how to increase your thinking capacity. Well, these statements could also be, what happens when I want to stop?
Yeah.
I'm speaking to a group this week, and part of my points I'm going to make is that sometimes when we think we have failed, maybe we're just supposed to pause, okay? And maybe we just had a bad plan, and we need to work that plan. And you think about the guy, the gold miner. Instead of, John says here, stop thinking more work and start thinking what works. So if he'd gotten, out of his own head, started thinking differently, if he'd brought an engineer in, then they might have found that gold. Now, in the book, 3 Feet from Gold, he talks about an incredible number of things that he learned from that. So increase your capacity is also stop thinking, can I, and start thinking, how can I? So when we fail, we think we fail. You know me about goals. I've got a goal, but
Right.
I'm going to establish a plan to get to that goal. We rise to the level of our plans, processes. We fall to the level of our goals. So that's why I put anything to do at the time connected to a goal when I want to achieve it. I put it in the plan. I don't put it as part of the goal. The goal is to achieve something. We want to achieve it in this amount of time by this time. Well, if we see that we think we're failing, maybe we're just supposed to pause, reevaluate, and correct. And these questions that John's got right here are good questions. Stop thinking one door and start thinking many doors. Repeat. Stop thinking more work and start thinking what works. Stop thinking can I and start thinking how can I. You think about all that when your plan's not coming around to achieve something, and you start asking yourself those questions.
And Danny, don't you think that one of the things we get stuck at, and I know I have, so I speak from experience. And by the way, most things I talk about, I speak from experience. So it's not like I'm out there at the guessing game. This has happened to me. You get stuck in a solution. You think you failed in an arena, right? Because you stop thinking about what you're talking about, extra solutions, more than one way to solve a problem, right? Another way to think into how something can be done. Like the guy hiring the engineer, he stepped outside himself and got out of his little tunnel vision of what he thinks he needed, to which is pretty powerful for me. You could talk a little bit into, if you wanted to, while we're on this, the law of expansion, because there's two other factors I think we haven't mentioned come in this, and that's fear of success and fear of failure. Those are pretty common things for a lot of people in their personal growth, correct?
Yeah, yeah, and it's hard to imagine that some people have a fear of success, and then some people have a hard time understanding. Well, you have a fear of failure. What does that? What does that mean? What keeps you from trying? Fear of failure. I'm afraid of failing, so then therefore I don't even try. Um, the fear of success normally, I mean, from what I found, people that have a fear of success, they're concerned about what that money will do to them. Maybe they've got some bad religion. They misunderstand the Bible verse about the eye of the needle, the camel going through the eye of the needle, and the rich man into heaven. They misunderstood that. They've been taught wrong about that, and I found a lot of that impacts a lot of people. That bad teaching about that Bible verse.
Gotcha. All right. So, any other added thoughts on the law of expansion? Except it's a huge, it's a big area, right?
Yeah, this area where he talks about how to increase your capacity for action.
Mm-hmm.
Stop doing only those things you have done before and start doing those things
Yeah.
you could and should do.
Yeah.
I'm taking a course right now on going through. It's about your present. I'm sorry, about your past, your present, and your future. And a few years ago, I did a timeline class. I think you sit in on some of that, and when we talked about our past successes and the environment we were in. So that's what John's talking about right here is stop doing only those things you have done before and start doing those things you could and should do. So in other words, what we didn't do before, we should do now. And that's one of the things that I think is coming out of this class that I'm taking. And it's not just writing little short essays. It's answering questions and multiple choices and stuff. It's pretty interesting.
Go buy the book, 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. Go visit DannyLSmith.com. Go over here and check out the YouTube channel. This is my YouTube channel. It's a playlist of our past 14 shows. We go to next week. Law of contribution. Danny, thank you, sir.
Appreciate it.
Have a good day.
Thanks, Hardy.